It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Nara Chamberlain. He is newly elected president, recently elected president of the IMA, and it is the tradition that the incoming president has a presidential address. Normally, he would have been able to deliver that in person, but we are now privileged to have him address us by video conference. Nara has himself built a powerful mathematical identity as a practicing mathematician, a member of the IMA Council, and now our president. And so I call on him to deliver the 2020 presidential address, Building a Powerful Mathematical Identity. Nara Chamberlain.
Thank you very much indeed, Richard, and it's really good to be here, and I hope everybody is safe and well. And so this is my presidential address, Building a Powerful Mathematical Identity. When the music starts, I will stop being informal and I will start being formal. So here we go. Hello, everybody. Right, what I would like to do is I would like to take you back to an event that occurred in June 2004. In June 2004, the IMA started a new initiative, and it was called the IMA Youngers Members Conference. It was to attract younger members, younger mathematicians to join the IMA, and actually to create a forum for the younger mathematicians within the IMA. And this was actually my first time I actually came to do a talk at the IMA at De Morgan House down in London. And my talk was on simulation modeling, but what you had was afterwards, after all the speakers had done their talks, we had like a discussion about how we could improve the image of mathematics. And there was one individual who had been at Oxford University, did his degree at Oxford University, did his master's at Southampton University, and then worked for the Bank of England. And he said, I wouldn't call myself a mathematician at a cocktail party. Now, the other delegates, there was around about 40 of us, all agreed that they wouldn't call themselves a mathematician at a cocktail party. What I said next changed my life forever. Hold that thought. I'm going to quote a United States Senator, Cory Booker, and he said this: leadership is not a position or a title, it is an action and an example. Now, like I said, this would be done at the Royal Society, but due to events, we're doing it live. But what we are entering the era of mathematics. You know, Professor Philip Bond wrote this report on the era of mathematics, an independent review of knowledge exchange in the mathematics sciences, and surely mathematics has gone mainstream. Back in March, I saw this this mathematical model equation on the BBC News, and I've never seen a mathematical equation on the BBC News talking about the how we actually model COVID. So surely mathematics has gone mainstream. But one question that has occurred is, in a world crisis, can we trust the mathematics? In the Times, they was actually targeting one of the lead mathematical modelers and saying, supermodelers, should we trust his science? And when we look at a previous crisis, let's say the financial crisis which occurred in 2008, mathematics was looked at as one of the causes of the financial crisis. So in a world crisis, can we trust the mathematics? So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to talk to you about one part of the IMA vision statement. And the IMA vision statement says this: to enhance the mathematical culture in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. I'll say again, to enhance the mathematical culture in the United Kingdom and elsewhere. So, as my title said, in building a powerful mathematical identity, we must understand this: mathematicians, who are we? Like I said, my name is Nara Chamberlain, and this is my story. Now, this is my parents, and my parents belong to what's called the Windrush generation, who came to England in the 1960s. My parents came from Jamaica. They didn't know each other in Jamaica, but what they did is they got married here in England, and so one of the things that they would say to me is, you know, they got married, started a family, and one of the things that they would always say to me is, Naira, you don't need anybody's permission to be a great mathematician. So even though my dad worked in a car factory and my mom was a caterer for the NHS, they knew the importance of mathematics. And what they keep emphasizing to me was, you don't need anybody's permission to be a great mathematician. And this is my wife, Jacqueline, and you know, Jacqueline, the photos on the left at the Royal Society and on the right at the University of Greenwich. Now, she's always challenged and supported me throughout my mathematical journey. And just going back, I did my first degree at what was then called Coventry Polytechnic. You know, did a mathematics degree, and my highlight there was actually working on an RF base, doing mathematical modeling, and also my final year project doing the Lorentz attractor, doing like a numerical simulation of the Lorentz attractor. My MSc was in industrial mathematical modeling at Loughborough University, and again, my highlight there was my dissertation, which was to do with the impact on an adhesive joint, looking at how materials actually react in an aggressive circumstances. And my PhD was at Portsmouth University, where what I was looking at the classical gambler's ruin problem and seeing how we could actually adapt it to play it over a network. And the title of the PhD was The Extension of the Gambler's Ruin Problem Played Over Networks. Now, for those who know me in person, you will know that I am very passionate about mathematics, but also not only am I passionate about mathematics, I wear many hats. See, my day job is I'm a mathematical modeling consultant, and I've been a mathematical modeling I've been a professional mathematician for over 25 years, been a modeling consultant for half of that period, you know, working either for Babcock or working for my present company, which is S&C Lavalin Atkins. And in my job, I would solve real world problems all over Europe. I've worked in places such as France, worked in Israel, worked in Netherlands, worked in Germany, and I've worked on things such as, like, say, volcanoes, oil rigs, aircraft, automotive, you know, Formula One. But there are certain mathematical adventures that I've been involved in. Like one time, I actually I wrote a mathematical algorithm that accidentally crashed a supercomputer. I've been involved in international rescue, and over the last past seasons, I've been using my mathematics trying to save Aston Villa. But also, I do, like I said, I wear a number of hats. I'm also a public speaker. Two of my most popular talks are, one, the mathematics that can stop an AI apocalypse, which I first did at the New Scientific Live last year, and also the Black Heroes of Mathematics, where I talk about the modern historical Black mathematicians and their contribution to the field of mathematics. Now, also being a, let's say, public speaker, math communicator, in 2018, I was invited to join a tournament called the Big Internet Math Off, done by Periodical. And this, I actually put together four talks, and the last talk which I did during the final was to do with the modeling the Marvel Black Panther, and I won that competition, and I got the nice title, World's Most Interesting Mathematician 2018. But also, in my first 15 years of my career, I used to work at a Saturday school. Every Saturday, I would do some voluntary work teaching mathematics at the inner city Saturday school in Birmingham. And during the last 5 years, I've been working for a charity organisation called Target Oxbridge, who try to increase the number of Black students to study mathematics and mathematical sciences at Oxford and Cambridge. I put on a 2-day mathematical masterclass. So, going on to my talk, here's a question. Why is the attitude towards mathematics different in the UK than in Europe? Now, the reason why I say that is I believe that one of the answers is a powerful mathematical identity. Now, the reason why I say that is one day I was at the Eiffel Tower and I looked up and on the side of the Eiffel Tower, I saw the names of mathematicians, and I thought, fantastic, it's great. But when I do the same in London and look up at Big Ben, I do not see no names of mathematicians. And in Parliament Square, I do not see any statues of any mathematicians. So this is one of the points I actually raised with Sadiq Khan, the Lord Mayor, and I was arguing to him about the value of mathematics and how it should be respected and valued in this country, especially in this country's capital. So why, again, is there a difference? Is it to do with Brexit? The answer is no. It's to do with another phrase called Mexit, more likely hard Mexit and soft Mexit. So what is hard Mexit? The definition of hard Mexit is when a mathematician no longer considers themselves as a mathematician. I repeat, when a mathematician no longer considers themselves as a mathematician. So when can hard Mexit occur? It can actually occur during school. Maybe a pupil would say, I really enjoy mathematics, but I can't see a future for myself in it. So henceforth, they choose not to become a mathematics or pursue any mathematical sciences. It could happen during university. Again, the same excuse. Somebody would not see any future of themselves in the mathematical profession. It could happen first year after graduation, when somebody, let's say, go out in industry and they probably get discouraged in terms of what they could do using their mathematics, or even later on in their career. And we're going on to the more common type. The second type of Mexit is soft Mexit. Now, the definition of soft Mexit is when a mathematician is uncomfortable being a mathematician. Yeah, when a mathematician is uncomfortable being a mathematician. So the problem with soft Mexit is that soft Mexit mathematicians influence younger mathematicians to hard Mexit. Because when I was saying in schools and universities, they will look at those people who they regard as role models and as leaders. And if they see them as having a soft Mexit attitude, they will say, look, I do not wish I do not see a future for myself in the field of mathematics. So here comes the question. If mathematics was put on trial, then let's say it was in a court case, let's say here at the Superior Court, and we had somebody, a mathematician who was into soft Mexit, defending mathematics, what would occur? Well, first thing first, the prosecution or our critics would say this: how can we trust mathematics in a world crisis when, 1, the public hates mathematics, 2, the media hates mathematics. Here I'm showing a video. This is a snapshot from a popular video from a pop group, and you can see that what you have is the students falling asleep when the mathematician is actually writing mathematics on the board. 3, the mathematics community is not very diverse. 4, the mathematical skills are not sustainable. Here you can actually see in the x-axis the stage of a life of let's say of a mathematician, and it's saying really and truly once you go beyond university, the mathematical skills that you actually employ, let's say at an industry or elsewhere, will decline. Mathematics has no USP. So if we're looking at, let's say, our related fields, let's say computer science, statistics, engineering, physics, operational research, data science, what is mathematics USP? Some argue that our field is getting, our USP is getting, our territory is getting shorter and shorter. It's like, as this picture shows, our territory is as big as a beach at Bournemouth during a sunny day at lockdown. It gets very overcrowded. Point 6, mathematics is like a hammer. It is static and it's just like a tool. So one of the things that when I went to a STEM conference, one of the scientists came up to me and saying, well, surely mathematics is like a hammer. So the same designer hammer that was used on Noah's Ark is the same type of a hammer that was used on Shade on the, how mathematics is a tool. How can mathematics be creative? And that's how the scientists at the STEM conference, that's how they actually visualize mathematics. And the point 7, mathematics is so unattractive that many graduates abandon the profession. Now, we can go on and on about this, but again, a challenge that I would put there is this how we wish to enter the era of mathematics? You know, is this how we wish to enter the era of mathematics? So again, as the prosecution would say, in a crisis, how can we trust mathematics? Now, I'll go back to the quote that I said, leadership is not a position or a title, it is action and example. So if you want to look at leadership, don't look any further than our IMA past presidents. There you see people, mathematicians, who are of action and example. In this IMA, in the past presidents of the IMA, we have presidents that were not only presidents of the IMA, that were also presidents of the OR Society and the Royal Statistical Society. We have a president that was helped in the design of Concord. We had a president that was the head of the Met Office. We have a president that was educational advisor to the government. We have a president that was into signal processing. We have a president that dealt with the Thames Barrier. We had a president who mentored the future Nobel Prize winner in physics. So we have a whole diverse, talented mathematicians who make an impact on society through mathematics. So I ran a little project called #IMA Past Presidents, where I looked at the past presidents from the beginning, and you can see that these presidents were people of influence, of character, and of impact. So myself, I was very much a fan of mathematics. I enjoyed researching mathematics, and also I enjoyed working and collaborating and researching a diverse group of mathematicians. For instance, I give you an example here. See, this one is mathematicians who inspired me. Now, I remember in the 90s when I was reading Fermat's Theorem by Simon Singh. I remember that even though I really respect Andrew Wells and what he did, one thing that did come to me was in 1955, these Japanese mathematicians, Shimura and Tamiyama, who observe a possible link between two apparent completely distinct branches of mathematics. Now, these were two pure mathematicians, and they were working in a time when people viewed Japan as suspicious, because this was like, say, 10 years after the Second World War had finished. But they came up with some maverick idea that later led to Andrew Wells finding a way to solve the Fermat-Last theorem. And for mathematicians to be that bold, you know, that was something that actually inspired me. Also, a mathematician that inspired me is Dr. Nazana Lawrence. Now, I remember coming across her website one time called Maths is Good for You. And what she did was she actually combined mathematical teaching, mathematical education, and history. And this was the first time I actually saw somebody actually combining these two distinct subjects together to make mathematics much more interesting. And there was an important quote here, is that if we neglect mathematical education, what type of mathematicians do we produce? So as a mathematical community, we must take care of our mathematical education, because what type of mathematicians do we produce? Another mathematician who inspired me was this gentleman here, Professor Keith Still, who came up with an idea, and then he did a PhD in that idea, and then he created a consultancy based on that idea, and he went all around the world doing consultancy on his field called crowd dynamics. He's now a professor at Manchester Metropolitan University, and what he did was he developed an agent-based simulation to model crowd safety. And for me, you know, this is he was, let's say, a leading professional mathematical modeler, somebody that I aspire to mimic and to become. But also, I'd say, final mathematician example of mathematician who inspired me is Katherine Johnson. Of course, Katherine Johnson, whose story was depicted in the Hollywood film Hidden Figures. And she was, like, say, an American mathematician that worked for NASA, and she did hand calculations that helped NASA, you know, orbit around the Earth and eventually get to the moon. So one of the things that I would say is that mathematicians, us as mathematicians, we should never stop learning. just because when we finish our degree or our PhD at a university, whether we're out in academia or whether we're out in the industry or whether we're in education, we never stop learning. I had a Twitter conversation with a representative from the mathematics department of Oxford High School, and they was commenting on this diagram about the stage of life of a mathematician, and they said, well, actually, through research and through Never Stop Learning, they actually showed where they can actually introduce strange attractors and chaos to the students used on a spreadsheet, and this is showing how their skills actually can develop and actually exceed the level for which they were at graduation. So one thing I'd say is that when mathematics is strong, it makes science stronger, technology stronger, engineering stronger, and the economy stronger. But in a forum, in a meeting, would you mathematicians, would you be confident to say the following? Mathematics is indisputably the greatest subject in the world. Why? It is one of the few disciplines that can teach science to scientists, engineering to engineers, technology to technologists, and I can go on and on. Mathematics is everywhere, and it is the lifeblood of any modern economy. Furthermore, a mathematical professor and a CEO of a tech startup once told me that mathematics is at least 100 years ahead of most disciplines. Is this true? Well, in 1796, the French mathematician Laplace described mathematically the idea of a massive star from which no light could escape. Today, we know this as a black hole. In 1939, Albert Einstein published an article in the respected journal, The Annals of Mathematics, in which he intended to prove that such black holes were impossible. So, in conclusion, Einstein was wrong, and the 18th century mathematician proved to be right. Mathematicians in the room. In today's modern data-driven economy, we are entering the era of mathematics. To the younger mathematicians, who among you will be the next Hannah Fry, the next Andrew Wiles, the next Katherine Johnson or Ramanujan? Even more importantly, make today be your first step, not your last. Finally, always let the world know that you are proud to be a mathematician. Now, I actually said that at a parliamentary speech at the STEM for Britain, and there what I had is I had a number of mathematicians there, but we had representatives from the science, technology, engineering, mathematical community, but also we had some politicians. And my brief was, because I was representing the CMF, was, Nara, you have 2 minutes to sell mathematics. And I was seeing the other presidents really selling their field. And I thought, right, I'm going to sell mathematics. I'm going to tell them that mathematics is indisputably the greatest subject in the world. And afterwards, I was getting my handshake and my back slapped by all of these representatives, because guess what? The people in the other STEM subjects, the people in the wider mathematical scientist disciplines, they want to see a strong mathematical representation, because when mathematics is strong, it makes their subject even stronger. So our identity, mathematicians, who are we? As I was saying, how we see ourselves will influence how others see us too. I say again, how we see ourselves will influence how others see us too. So there will always be critics, there always will be critics of mathematics, there will always be critics of mathematicians. That will never go away. However, what I'd say is we welcome challenge, as this helps us to grow. This helps us to grow. This helps us to grow. But one thing I would say, we should never let our critics limit us. Never let our critics limit us and stop us from making an impact. Because a mathematician grows when we work outside our comfort zone. So when we are challenged and we have to work outside our comfort zone, that is when a mathematician grows, and that's when the field of mathematics grows. So one of the things I'd say to mathematicians is know your worth. mathematicians must know their value and worth in any arena that they enter, whether that will be engineering, whether that is statistics, whether that's physics. You know, if you enter data science, make sure you are a mathematical data scientist. If you enter engineering, make sure that you're a mathematical engineer. If you're into statistics, make sure you're a mathematical statistician. Mathematicians must know their value and worth in any arena they enter. So what we're going to do is I'm going to show you some examples of arenas that I've entered. Now, as I was saying before, is I used to teach at a Saturday school in the inner city of Birmingham, and I used to teach some, let's say, 12 to 14-year-olds mathematics. And what happened was, one day I was teaching these boys, and I said, okay, I'm going to teach you, I want to just to warm up, let's do some long multiplication. And they started complaining to me, and I said, we haven't been taught long multiplication. I said, but wait a minute, you are 14, you don't know long multiplication, but in about 18 months time, you're going to be doing your GCSE and you don't know long multiplication. And I was thinking, how did this occur? Now, here, I'm actually going to quote Rob Eastway, a mass communicator, and he wrote an article for the BBC back in September 2010, and he says that mathematics has to move away from blindly following rules to techniques a child can understand. So what I don't know what happened with these 14-year-olds, was it a case of the teacher told them and they was disengaged because they were blindly following rules that they didn't understand? Or was it the teacher who didn't portray the way that actually the child could actually connect to? So thinking about these 14-year-old boys, I came up with this technique.
Okay, what is 87 times 52 equal to? Quite hard. Think about it like this. Write down the 8, write down the 8, write down the 7, write down the 7, times, 5, 2, 5, 2. Draw the shape. Draw the shape. Draw the shape. Draw the shape. 8 times 5 is 40. 8 times 2, 16. 7 times 5, 25. 7 times 2, 14. Add it up. 4, 6, 5, 1. That's 12. Count the 1. 0, 1, 3, 4. Add the 1 means 5. Bring down 4. There you go. The answer is 4,524.
So I showed them those boys that technique, and because what I wanted to explain to them, saying that if you know up to your 9 times table, then you should be able to do long multiplication. So I showed them that technique, and they got it straight away. I showed it to a different cohort of pupils the following week. They got it straight away. And then after some years of procrastination, I decided to write a paper called Long Multiplication and Percentages Without a Calculator. And this was actually published in an article by the Mathematical Association. So that technique actually now belongs to me. And the last time I actually saw it was actually being used over in Malaysia. But again, it was trying to, instead of blindly following rules, it's trying to get that connection between multiplication and long multiplication, emphasize them to the pupils that say, if you know up to your 9 times table, you can do long multiplications, just to getting over this barrier, this blindly following rules. And I think it's very, very important. Now, one of the things that when I actually graduated and did my master's, I actually went into the field of engineering, and I was very much a mathematician in an engineering environment. And I would work in the job that was advertised. It was to say I had to write mathematical simulations to solve complex engineering problems. Now, at first, the company that I was working for, they was looking for an engineer to do that, and I explained to them, saying, "Look, really and truly, I'm a mathematician, but this field, like I say, was made up mostly of engineers, and below what you see this in the equation below, it's called the Reynolds equation. Now, the Reynolds equation origin may have origin may have been in the mathematics community, but the engineers have come, they've taken it and they said, this is ours. We use the Reynolds equations when we're looking at lubrications of, let's say, in terms of pistons or in terms of bearings. We regard the Reynolds equations as that something that belongs firmly within the engineering community, doesn't belong with the mathematics community. But I said, well, I'm a mathematician. I'm surely I can help you apply this Reynolds equation in the automotive applications. And they would say this to me, well, you are not an engineer. You know, you are not an engineer. You're a mathematician. There's things that engineers can do that mathematicians can't do, and this is an engineering environment. So there was one problem where it was to do with what you see here is something called a G-rotor. Now, a G-rotor is found in certain car engines, which helps pump all around the car engine. And the idea is to increase the space, optimize the maximum space, and then to close it down. Yeah. Now, a G-rotor is the way you create a G-rotor is that you use something called an epicloid, and what you do is with this epicloid is you take the gradient of the epicloid, and that will generate the shape of the inner G-rotor, and then you'll create another epicloid, one which has got more leads, and that will create the shape of the outer G-rotor. But there was a bit of a problem. This company was really innovative because I was using these mathematical equations to create this G-rotor. But when we, so they painted the design, they painted the methodology. But when we came to actually to build it and put it in the rig, it wouldn't rotate. And so my boss was giving it to all the engineers to try and find out what the problem is. And eventually it came to me and they said, well, Nara, can you have a look at this? Can you find out what was wrong? And I said, well, this is what's wrong. I said, at this point here, where we're supposed to find the gradient, at this point, there are two gradients, and instead of recognizing that these points represent the points on the G-rotor, the engineers have made an assumption where you've just taken the two gradients and taken the average. And I said, because you did that, what you've done, you've actually corrupted the shape. So I actually worked out what that shape should be exactly. And so what had occurred was we managed to come up with a G-rotor that was 7 times more efficient than the Japanese competitor. That is showing how mathematicians can make an impact in the engineering environment. The second case I'm going to talk about is the problems with bearings, and this is to do with Formula One racing. Now, what occurred here is that I wanted to go and work over in the Netherlands, but as a secondment, but my boss has said to me, well, because I think I was approaching the age of 30, and my boss said, well, really and truly, you shouldn't go because mathematicians hit their peak when they are 21. And I said, look, I'm still sure that I've been working, doing mathematics. I've never stopped learning, so I'm sure that I'm still just as good as I was when I was 21. So now, here was the problem, was what you have is that you had the wheels which was connected to the main chassis, but if the bearings was created too much friction, what could occur is that you have some locking and that the wheels could actually fly off. And so I said to my boss, so well, send me to the Netherlands because I used to work with the competitors and I'm sure that I can actually work out a way actually solving this problem. So, but what they're saying is that, and this is again with engineers working in an engineering environment, they say that there are problems which are too complicated to be solved by mathematics. I said, well, let me have a go, let me have a look, let me see what I can do. And so again, this was to do with the Reynolds equation. And again, the Reynolds equation is something that engineers believe is in their domain. Even though it is a partial differential equation, they believe that this is that resolves in their domain because they have the engineering knowledge how to apply it. So, but one of the things I realized is that the problem is that the bearing company had come up with a simulation, and then the Formula One company had come up with a simulation, but the two algorithms were incompatible to each other. So one of the things that I was looking at is they said to me, well, Nara, is there a way of actually just changing the code, the code, so it would be made compatible to the Formula One simulation? So I was thinking, well, what is the quickest way of actually changing a computer a code? And I thought, well, the quickest way is to write a computer virus. And I thought, well, should I isn't computer viruses usually evil? I'd say, well, no, what happens if I write a computer virus that actually will go into the bearing simulation and then converts it and make it compatible with the Formula One simulation, and then put it then embed it in, so that you would have just one simulation where it would actually work out the bearing simulation embedded within the Formula One simulation. So we did that, and that was like a 6 weeks project because that was in the middle of the Formula One season, and writing this virus actually worked. And what occurred was the Formula One team that we was actually working for, our client, actually went on to win the championship that season. So another thing, and this is a different field, this is all to do with the energy field, is called predicting the competitor's behavior. Now, one of the energy companies, they actually came up with a mathematical model, which what they wanted to do was it actually predicted a 5% growth in market share per month until it became number one. This is what this mathematical model actually said. Now, but thing is, they assumed that the competitor would maintain their own strategies, So, so they would just go for, like I say, 5% increase in market share, become number one, and there will be no reaction from the competitor. Now, one of the things I challenged the business, I said, well, look, from a mathematical point of view, surely your competitors will respond to an aggressive grab at market share. Surely they would respond. And they said, well, modeling is either wrong or lucky, because really and truly, what has happened is that the leadership of that energy company came up with a vision, and what they wanted to do was they wanted to produce a model that actually backed up what the leadership actually said. Yeah, let's produce a model that says, here's the evidence that we can actually increase by 5% until we become number one. We don't believe that that we can actually model what the competitor's going to do. And then I said to them, well, using, let's say, mathematics, I said, well, have you ever heard of something called the invisible boxer analogy? Now, the invisible boxer analogy goes like this. Let's say you're a boxer and you go into the ring, but your opponent is invisible. The question is, what do you do? Now, here's one strategy, is that you go into the middle and actually engage the boxer, because every time you engage the boxer, you learn something more about that boxer. You learn whether they're left-handed, right-handed, do they like jabbing, do they like working on the inside, how tall, how small they are. And then the more you engage, then you can actually come up with a strategy of how to beat them. And one of the possible strategies, is to move into the corner, beckon the boxer to come towards you, and then once they're coming towards you, you turn them around, trap them into the corner, and you will know exactly where their chin is to knock them out. Another equivalent an analogy is the invisible chess player game, where you're playing a game of chess and your opponent has got two pieces, but the thing is, the opponent is invisible and their pieces are invisible. The question is, what do you do? And the answer is, move your chess pieces up to the other side of the board as quick as possible, but with each piece backing up the other. And as soon as one of your pieces is taken, you know exactly where they are. So that is a way you can actually know what your opponent is doing. And what I was saying to the energy company is saying, every time we lose a customer to the energy company, or every time we win a customer from our competitor energy company, we actually learn something about their strategy. And so what I did was I created almost like a Markov chain to look at the movement of customers between the energy companies. This is, like, say, a partial one, because if I did the complete one, it will look a little bit messy. But this is, like, say, a partial one that looks at the movement from the customers going from one company to its competitors. Yeah. And also what I'm doing is that when I created this Markov chain in this mathematical model, I also looked at the historical market chain. So from there, I could actually calibrate the model to look at the strategies that the other competitors would use, and also to validate the model. And so what I could do is, with this Markov Monte Carlo simulation, is then I could actually do a simulation of the market share. Now, one of the things that we didn't actually take into consideration was there were two types of, let's say, customers. There was, say, good customers, those who actually pay their bills by direct debit and don't look at their bills. And there's another thing called Angry Birds. That Angry Bird is somebody that actually that looks at their bills every time, do not pay the bills by direct debit, and also if they see that there's something wrong, they would phone up the company, they would complain and refuse to pay the bill. Now, the problem with Angry Birds is that Angry Birds costs energy company money. They would have to employ people to write letters to them, employ more people on the help desk to speak to them, employ lawyers to write letters to them, and probably have to employ bailiffs people to eventually go out and take their meters. But Angry Birds costs energy companies money. So really and truly, when this energy company was talking about doing a 5% increase, they was not taking in consideration the Angry Birds. So they believe that they would do a 5% increase. They're here in this green line. They would do, let's say, an increase until they become #1 in market share. But what they didn't realize is how the competitors could actually react. And this is some scenarios that my simulation actually picked up. It says, one, the other companies could do like a uniform response where they said, okay, if you want to become #1, then what we'll do is we will ensure that our good customers remain with us, but you can become #1. But guess what? You can have all of our Angry Birds. But the problem is if our company have all the Angry Birds, that would eat into our profit. Yeah, that would certainly eat into our profit and may not make our business viable. And even not only that, another scenario is just the market leader makes a response. The market leader can just say, right, we will just ensure that one, we keep a hold of all our good customers, and what we'll do is that we will flood the market with the Angry Birds. So henceforth, really and truly, our position remains very much the same. We do not become #1 in the market. So this whole idea that this mathematical model actually identified something called, let's say, Angry Birds, then a number of months later, this article came out into Utility Week, which stated that, well, one of the competitors' profits went up despite shedding 600,000 customers. This just shows that actually Angry Birds do exist and actually are used as a tactic against another energy company if it decides to do a market share. So moving on to my final case study is what's called Goldilocks and the Three Bears. Now, one day, a Royal Navy captain came up to me and says, Naira, we've heard that you are a mathematician who likes solving real world problems, and you're good at solving complex problems. And I said, yeah. And they said, well, we have a problem with a future ship. And the problem with this future ship is, one, it is expensive to build, but the most important problem is that it is actually unaffordable to run. It is unaffordable to run. And they said to me, is there a way that you can come up with a mathematical model that can solve this problem about it being unaffordable to run? And I said, let me think about it. And I said to him, well, have you ever heard the story Goldilocks and the Three Bears? And he goes, you what? And I said, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. You see, there's a part of the story that goes like this. See, Goldilocks, she comes into the house and she sees some porridge and she eats this porridge and says, this one's too hot. And she eats this other porridge and says, this one's too cold. And then she eats this other porridge and says, this one's just right. And I said, that is how you solve your problem. There you go. And what he did is he went away and I didn't see him again for another 2 weeks. And then in 2 weeks' time, he came back to me and he said, Naira, would you like to follow me? So I followed him and I walked into this room and I said, hello. And they said, hello. And said, this is, we're having this meeting to talk about canceling this project. Yeah. And I said, okay. And they said, can you come, we've heard that you've come up with a solution about the unaffordability of this future ship. And I said, yes. I said, yes, I have. And I said, can you tell us about it? And I said, yes. Have you ever heard the story Goldilocks and the Three Bears? And I said, excuse me. I said, Goldilocks and the Three Bears. See, Goldilocks, she goes into her house and she sees this porridge. She says, well, this one's too hot. And she eats this other porridge. She says, this one's too cold. And she eats this porridge. She said, this one's just right. I said, that is how you solve your problem. And then they said, do you realize that this project is of national importance and you're coming up with some sort of nursery rhyme? And I said, oh, okay, let me be a bit more specific then. Then what you need to do is with that ship is that you need to look at its cost, you look at its design, look at its capability, and then you create a whole series of nonlinear equations, which then you write in an algorithm, write a computer program. Then you say to that computer program, go design me a ship with the right capability at the right cost that is not too hot, not too cold, just right. And I showed them an example, and they says, oh, actually, that one could actually work. See, now that was over 10 years ago. So the question is, would you like to see what that ship looks like today? There you go.
I must admit, I held my breath as she came here through the harbour entrance because it's so small.
We're a proud Navy family coming here to see the ship going in. My husband had worked on the programme, so it's been kind of a lot of our lives. In fact, our wedding cake was the Queen Elizabeth Carrier.
It was brilliant, worth waiting for. It's a brilliant experience.
It'll take some time to build up the operating envelope and our understanding of the complexity of operating a ship of this scale. But we've done a lot in preparation for that, working with both the French and the United States Navy.
Yes, so the HMS Queen Elizabeth, it's the largest aircraft carrier that the Royal Navy has ever had. And so somewhere on that ship, there is a placard and it says, Dr. Nara Chamberlain, and it will remain there with my name as well as other contributors. It will remain there for the next 50 years. And on the right-hand side, you see there's an American encyclopedia called the Encyclopedia of Mathematics and Society, and what somebody actually wrote an article about the mathematical model that actually they developed that made the HMS Queen Elizabeth come into being. So, as I say, is that I enjoy representing mathematics, and in 2014 the Science Council actually recognized me as being one of the top 100 scientists in the UK for developing mathematical modeling applications for industry. Like I said, I have worked very much outside, say what's called, let's say, the comfort zone, but that is where I actually grow as a mathematician. But what I would like to do is I would like to go back to June 2004, where I told you a story about my first IMA event, which was the Younger Mathematicians Conference. And a mathematician said that they wouldn't call themselves a mathematician at a cocktail party. Now, I've heard people say that over again, that they feel comfortable calling themselves a mathematician at a party or in any other place. But at the conference, what I said next changed my life forever. And in effect, what I said was also captured in an article in the Mathematics Today. And I said this: a good friend of mine who is a non-mathematician once told me, if mathematicians are not enthusiastic about mathematics, then who else on earth will be? He was right. I do not subscribe to any negative public perception of mathematics and mathematicians. I am extremely proud to be a mathematician and will defend the subject in front of anybody. Now, one of the other things that this article went on to talk about was, it talked about a debate I had with a DJ, where a DJ said to the whole of the West Midlands that mathematics was boring. Now, unscripted, unprepared, I rang up and we had a debate about mathematics. And then at the end, she said that mathematics she said, congratulations, Nara, you're the first person that made mathematics sound interesting. She didn't use the word interesting, but I'll just say interesting. And so, yeah, so that's me. I enjoy mathematics and I enjoy defending mathematics, and I will defend mathematics in front of anybody. So in conclusion, not only should we build a powerful mathematical identity, we should embrace it. Also, leadership is not a position or a title, it is an action and example. So the question is, mathematicians, who are we? It's important. And I'll say again, mathematicians, who are we? Now, what I wanted to do is I want to thank a few people that's taken me on my journey. Now, I got my PhD in 2014 and I became president in 2020. And I've worked with quite a number of diverse people and organizations like University of Greenwich, UCL, Oxbridge, Plus Magazine. And all of this, my journey has helped me put this talk together about building a powerful mathematical identity. I would like to thank you for listening. This is my presidential address, Building a Powerful Mathematical Identity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nara. It gives me, I found that personally found that a very challenging and stimulating address. I'm sure the other members of the audience did. We have had some questions building up in the chat box. I'll try and I'll group a couple of them together since we have a few minutes. One question from Pete Cardwell says, in your work with kids in school, how would you or did you respond when they ask something like, less than 1% of us will end up using advanced maths, why should we spend time learning it? And I'll group that together with a related question from Ian Phillips, who says, when a young person identifies an interest in mathematics, where do they go to find out career opportunities and how do they get there? So advice to children, I think, is the theme of those two questions.
Yeah, advice to children. I mean, one of the things that I do is that I work for a charity called Speakers of School, and sometimes, you know, when I actually show them how I use mathematics in a real world application, you know, even when they don't see, let's say, for instance, I may not be a person that wants to go into mathematical sciences, but this whole idea of strategy and logic, it is a life skill which is important to them. You know, I mean, it's a very important, life skill, and they absolutely get it. I mean, even though I might be talking to 200 pupils, they're all actually getting that recognize that mathematics is an important life skill. Now, the second question is now the IMA. And what we do have is that we have a great website, and there's a website that we actually support called Maths Careers. You know, that is a good website where it actually shows the type of careers that you can have, you know, doing mathematics, mathematical sciences, you know, etc. Yep. Okay.
Yes, you can hear me now. Thank you. There's another question which you did, in fact, allude to your answer to this question from EBI Research Office. What is your attitude to people or organizations who talk about the inability to do basic mathematics as a badge of pride? Is this a damaging normalization of incompetence, or should we just take it as a bit of fun? And the question, I think, is, should we as professional mathematicians try to do anything about that?
Well, one of the things is that we have to recognize is that this idea that we can't do mathematics is a matter of pride. Yeah, if you look at other countries, there are some other countries that will have the same attitude, but it does become a bit of an international embarrassment if you go into let's say Europe, or if you go into Asia, where the attitude towards mathematics is very much different. You know, with the world getting much smaller, and especially with, you know, with doing business, I don't think that your partners or your customers in those countries will be very happy if you actually had employers or your leadership actually was saying that. So it's, you know, our economy you know, whether you choose to go down the mathematical science route or not the mathematical science route, we do need to have that good solid foundation of mathematics. So, and as professional mathematicians, one thing I would say is that we must always talk about the value of mathematics and be proud of being a mathematician. We shouldn't be apologetic about mathematics. You know, we shouldn't, you know, if we walk into a room like a party, we should shy away and say, I'm not a mathematician. And if somebody says to you, I wasn't good at mathematics or because of my teacher or whatever, we should actually explain to them about the value of mathematics and why mathematics is important. And that's my view on the matter.
Thank you, Nara. I think that's a rousing statement to end the session on. We have just 1 minute to go. So in that remaining minute, I'd like to do two things. Firstly, of course, I'd like to thank you, Nara, for stimulating a challenging and very, very useful and thought-provoking address. I'm sure we'll all take away lots of ideas and challenges into our work as mathematicians, and that your talk will help us in turn to build our own powerful identities as mathematicians and for mathematics. I'd just like to remind the audience that this is the first of the sessions of the Maths 2020 conference. The other sessions, following sessions, which you register for separately, are on the IMA website. But having given the advertising break, I'd now like to reiterate thanks to the IMA staff who've been working behind the scenes to make sure that we could all see and hear Nara, and of course, to once again to thank him for his address. Thank you very much indeed, Nara.
Thank you.